Aloha and welcome to the video on the respiratory system. Our goals for the video are to describe the process of gas exchange in the lungs. We'll also describe the process of breathing and we'll list some of the respiratory diseases. Okay, so here is our respiratory system. And what we have is we start off with air coming into us and enters into the pharynx. It then enters into the larynx, which is our voice box, and then goes down the trachea and into the bronchus, which eventually forms the lungs here. So we can kind of see where that's at. Notice the esophagus from the digestive system is here as well. So we have air and food passing through the same things. The glottis is the opening of the respiratory system, and there's a little flap of skin called the epiglottis, which when food enters or water enters, it closes the airways so we don't get water and food into our lungs. Now in the lungs, we see this breaking of this air tube, this trachea here. It's going to come down and it's going to break into these ever smaller itty bitty little pieces. It'll break down into bronchiolia and eventually into the alveolus, which is a small little air sac. And we'll show you that one in the next slide. The other part of the respiratory system I want you to be aware of is this guy right here, the diaphragm. And that's a strong muscle here. And that's what actually allows us to breathe. And we'll talk about that in a couple slides as well. Now the purpose of the respiratory system is for gas exchange to occur. So what we noticed is we have this hollow tube that enters into our body. It goes all the way down to the bronchioli and then it enters into the alveoli. The alveoli are these large collections of alveolus, which is a single sac-like structure. And what happens is the air enters into that and these alveolus are then covered in capillaries. So we see an awful lot of blood vessels right there. And the blood vessels you can kind of see lie right up on the border here. And in these blood vessels, when we have an abundance of oxygen in the alveolus, the oxygen is going to go into the blood cells and it'll attach to the hemoglobin on a blood cell. When they do this, we'll notice that there's more carbon dioxide in the blood. That carbon dioxide is going to flow out into the alveolus. And then when we exhale out that CO2. So this is how we get this blood exchange. We create this very thin barrier here, which allows the normal concentration. The oxygen is going to be more in the air. It's going to drive into the cells. The carbon dioxide in the cells is going to be more than the air. It's going to flow outwards that way. And that's how we make this switch occur. Okay, so let's talk about how it is that we actually are able to breathe. As we mentioned earlier, we have this muscle down here called the diaphragm. And when the diaphragm contracts, what it does is it extends down this way into the gut. So when you breathe in, you'll notice that your stomach area, your guts will kind of like extend out a little bit. And that's because the diaphragm is pushing down on those. But as it pushes down on those and the rib cage rises a little bit, it creates this empty space here. And that allows the lungs to expand. And when the lungs expand, it pulls air into them that way. Now, the opposite is when you exhale. When you exhale, the diaphragm relaxes and it's going to go up this way. The rib cage is going to lower down a little bit. It makes this area in here a little bit smaller. So the lungs are going to get a little bit smaller and that'll actually push the air outwards. So when you inhale, your diaphragm contracts. It makes this area larger and air flows in. When you exhale, your diaphragm relaxes. It makes this area smaller and the air rushes out. And that's how we breathe. Okay, let's talk real quickly about a couple of respiratory system diseases. Asthma is when we have an irritated airway. And what happens is normally you can see this here. There's a wide opening, so our airways are wide and constricted. With asthma, what happens is we get irritated and there's inflammation inside of it. And instead of it being a large opening, it gets to be a smaller and smaller opening. And what we notice is it's harder to breathe through that. You have to pull the air through a little bit harder. So you're not breathing as easily as you normally do. Something similar to that is bronchitis. We have our bronchitis here, but with bronchitis, instead of it being irritated, instead, what we notice is we have mucus starting to fill in here. And as that mucus fills in here, it's that same result. It's going to fill in and it's going to make the airway a little bit smaller, so breathing gets a little bit harder that way. Close to bronchitis, we have pneumonia. And pneumonia, if you recall back, we have these little sacs called the alveoli. And in pneumonia, they'll fill up or they'll get some fluid inside of them. So what that means is there's now this fluid that our oxygen is going to have to transfer through to get to the blood that way. So it kind of makes it more difficult to breathe as well. Emphysema is going to be where these actual sacs break apart. And you can see it really clearly down here. And what that means is now we have less surface area. So again, there's less areas where we can breathe with. So it's like having a smaller lung per se. And then finally we get to lung cancer. And lung cancer is where we have this tumor going in, and that's just going to take away part of the lung. So it makes it harder to breathe. So all of the respiratory diseases makes it harder for us to breathe, or makes it less effective when we do breathe. And that's what the problem is then we no longer have the gas exchange, and that affects the rest of the body that way. Okay, so in summary of the respiratory system, the function is to take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Real simple function, that's what we do breathe for. The structures, we have the lungs, the pharynx, the larynx, the bronchioles, the alveoli, and the bronchiole. And then remember we talked about that muscular diaphragm that allows us to breathe. Okay, so that's it for the respiratory system. Good luck with the lessons, and we'll see you in the next video.